Meow! Thanks to Martha at Old School Prepping for pointing me in the direction of another video on, yes you guessed it, Swedish prepping.
Hi you guys. Urine, fertilizer.
Speaking of nuclear weapons, recent threats from Russia's President Vladimir Putin to use nuclear weapons have sent a shudder across the world, conjuring visions of Armageddon and nuclear fallout, echoes of the Cold War. The COVID pandemic certainly showed the world how swiftly a society can grind to a halt. Most people managed to survive that, but how would they cope with other catastrophes?
How do you prep?
In Sweden, with its bid to join NATO and the war in Ukraine, citizens are being encouraged to get ready.
Canadians not being encouraged to prep by our leadership.
What's called prepping has gone mainstream.
In Sweden.
Sweden is one of the last places you'd expect Armageddon. It hasn't been at war for over 200 years, but the state is urging citizens to prepare for catastrophe.
Swedish government information message. Although Sweden is safer than many other countries, there are still threats to our security and independence. Everyone who lives in Sweden shares a collective responsibility for our country's security and safety. If you are prepared, you are contributing to improving the ability of the country as a whole to cope with a major strain.
One of the fundamental differences between the United States and Sweden is that out of necessity, Americans are much more self-reliant. There is a social contract here, and in return for paying some of the highest taxes in the world, the Swedes and other Scandinavians expect the state to take care of them from the cradle to the grave. But the COVID pandemic exposed the flaws in that system and undermined public trust. What's more, the prospect of the war in Ukraine spilling across borders into other countries has accelerated the need for people here to be more self-sufficient.
It would be fascinating and a bit sick to watch a nuclear war on another planet to figure out whether collectivized prepping is better than individualistic prepping. I think at this point I can confidently say we don't know. What I can also confidently say, in the event of a nuclear war, the initial survival in Sweden is going to be much higher than in Canada or the United States because of the availability of bunkers and the ability to funnel people into those bunkers. Even without food and water supply, just being able to shelter for 12 to 48 hours will significantly drop radiation deaths in a nuclear war specifically.
There's a substantial difference between Swedish small-town practitioners and American YouTuber The Sensible Prepper.
Without rule of law, if things really kind of go sideways, there's a lot of people out there, they become desperate. They want food or they want to do whatever, or they're just nefarious and they just want to cause trouble. I just want to highly recommend, guys, that you stock up on ammo now.
In no SHTF ever in recorded history has that ever happened. How many rounds should you actually prep compared to how many seeds? For many Americans, the idea of prepping without a firearm is insane. For most of the world, the concept of being surrounded by firearms is equally insane. So let us leave this one aside. But I will point out again to Americans who are not really aware of what's going on in the planet around them, that Canada and Sweden are actually much more heavily armed than you might think.
Here we have freeze-dried peppers, 15 years shelf life. And then we have like butter with long shelf life, apricot jam.
Tins of peas, curried rice, but no ammo. Not a single round in the booming online prepping store run by Fredrik Farnstrom.
Every time something happens in the world, like there's a war or the pandemic or terrorist bombings and things like that, sales goes up.
As a species, humans are very much retroactive rather than proactive, and that's a shame.
We have a lot of water purification equipment. There are a lot of lakes and rivers in Sweden, so if you purify the water with some kind of equipment, the water is drinkable.
Same in Canada. I use a 18,000 litre purifier called Lifestraw Mission 12. It comes in a small size and recently they weren't available. I managed to buy one, so I have two. One I use, camping and kayaking, and one as a backup. I also have a home Berkey filter, and that's ready to go, and that can last me a couple of years to 10 years, depending on how contaminated the water is, how much effort I put into treating it. The bottom line here is you can buy buckets of pool shock, but the ability to use non-chemical gravity filters that are simple to use and don't contaminate the fresh water with dirty water is a vital skill, provided they remove viruses.
When I started, I believed the normal customer would be a man living in the outskirts, far away from the cities. But it's not like that. I have people all over Sweden, and a lot of them are living inside the cities, like in flats.
No excuses in Sweden about living in an apartment having no money. Prep.
I wouldn't go so far to say that there's an increased level of fear in the public society.
If disaster strikes, the Swedish government will turn to psychiatrist Philip Arnberg for advice on how to handle the country's collective mental state.
Psychiatry is an interesting science. If you study it as a prepper, I have around the edges. It does actually tell us some interesting things. Over time, governments and medical professionals really expect populations to react with severe mental depression and illness, in fact going completely nuts, in the event of a sudden war. And over time, that's never ever happened.
In all crisis management, even when it comes to human behavior and our psychology, we have to realize that most of the preparations that we can do are things that we have to do before the crisis.
Very true this. A lot of people out there are going to say, if Y happens, I will do X. No. If you can, legally, do X now. Do it before Y happens.
So I think overall it is a good idea to increase the awareness among the public.
I agree. New York City did this recently, and they told people in shopping malls by signage what they should do if a nuclear bomb suddenly went off without no warning. What I noticed was very little support for that action from New York City. I didn't see any preppers out there saying, hey, New York City did this, great job New York City, and actually extending and amplifying the information that New York City was providing. No, they rushed down lines saying, conspiracy, are they going to drop bombs on us for Agenda 21? It's unfortunate. If you're going to prep, either shut up and get off social media, or try and help the world be a better place.
The main takeaway is the hope that the day preppers are getting ready for never comes.
I'm Huples Cat, and I support that hope. Thanks for watching. Have a great week. Be careful out there and be safe, but be sane. One of the things I like to say is, next week on...
Take a glass of wine and just relax. We're not gonna make it anyway.
Pretty difficult to sit and do nothing, because I'm not used to that.
This has been a post-operative Sleepy Terrier production 2022.